Angular motion is when objects travel along curved paths. This is like the swinging motion of a pendulum. It is basically the rotation around a point or axis, which contrasts linear motion, in which objects move in a straight path. A lever is a rigid bar resting on a pivot, which is used to move heavy loads with one end when the pressure is applied together. There are three types of levers: first class lever, second class lever, and third class lever. A first class lever is when a fulcrum is placed between the effort and the load, like a seesaw. An example of this in sport is the head and neck during neck extension. The joints, which is the fulcrum, is between the front of the school and the neck extends the muscles which are load and effort. The second class lever, this is when the load is between the effort and the fulcrum, like a wheelbarrow. An example of this in sport is a calf raise. When a calf raise is performed, the effort comes from the gastrocnemius muscle, the load comes from your body weight and extra weight you are holding, which acts on the tibia and the fulcrum, and the fulcrum is made up of the metacarp, whatever that is, joints. Third class lever. This is when the effort is between the load and the fulcrum. An example of this is a weighted bicep curl. The load is in one hand and the levering is being performed. The effort comes from the forearm muscle lifting, and the fulcrum is the elbow joint. Planes of movement. Planes of movement are imaginary lines that separate the body into opposing segments which stand when standing in anatomical position. There are three planes of movement: sagittal, frontal, and transverse. The sagittal plane is which divides the body into the left and right segments. Examples of this is when a person is running. The frontal plane is what divides the body into front and back segments. An example in sport is when a person is doing star jumps. And finally, the transverse plane divides the body into the top and bottom segments. An example of this in sport is when a person rotates their torso, like when someone is throwing a rugby ball or shot put. Axes of rotation. An axis of rotation is a straight line around in which an object rotates. There are three types of axes: sagittal, transverse, and frontal axes. Sagittal axis passes along horizontally from posterior to anterior and is formed at the intersection of the sagittal and transverse planes. An example of this in sport. Frontal axis passes horizontally from left to right and is performed by the intersection of the frontal and transverse planes. An example of this in sport is when cricket players are bowling and their arm rotates around the shoulder joint. Vertical axis passes vertically from inferior to superior and is formed at the intersection of the sagittal and frontal planes. An example of this in sport is hammer throw, in which the ball is rotating around the athlete's body. Center of mass. A center of mass is a theoretical point within an object or system. An object where the entire mass of an object or system can be considered to be concentrated. Center of mass's location impacts movement because dependent on where the center of mass is, it will mean that only certain movements will be able to be performed without overbalancing and falling over. For example, in football, a lot of movements can be performed due to the center of mass must be in the right place for them to be able to achieve it. Center of mass affects humans in many different ways. Due to humans having moving bodies, center of mass location is dependent on what position their bodies are in. This will mean the right sequences of movement. If they do the right sequences of movement, they can achieve a certain outcome due to the center of mass changing location throughout that sequence. Similarly, because not every human has the same build, each center of mass will vary depending on the body structure, even if they are in the same position. As previously stated, your center of mass changes location depending on what position you're in. This means if you're in certain positions and your center of mass is too far over in a certain direction, this will cause you to overbalance and potentially fall over. On the other hand, if you're in a different position and your center of mass is in a certain place, it will prevent you from falling over due to the weights being evenly distributed. An example of of overbalance is in javelin, just after they have thrown the javelin, they might fall over the line and get disqualified due to their centre of mass being too far over, causing them to fall over due to their lack of balance. And on the other hand, a ballerina can be on the balls of her feet, but still be balanced due to the centre of mass being directly above her feet. Levers, and changes in centre of mass are combined to affect every sport exercise activity, but the ones we will be looking at are high jumps, gymnastics, martial arts, and tennis. There are also many different aspects that affect each of these things, which make them all different. Some of these things include equipment used, height, stature, and body proportions. All of these combine together to play crucial roles in every aspect of sport and an athlete's performance. If an athlete can utilise these properly, their performance will increase drastically. High jump. In high jump, both first and second class levers are used during the event. The second class is used when they are jumping. They flex. They flex something, causing the level. Similarly, the first class lever is used in the neck, in which the athlete jumps to look upwards. This is because the athlete has to see where they are jumping and to time it perfectly to get over the bar. During high jump, there are movements in the centre plane about the front axis. This occurs when the athlete swings their arm and leg upwards to give themselves momentum to get over the bar. Similarly, movement occurs in the frontal plane about the sagittal axis. This occurs in the torso when they are jumping over the bar. They twist their torso to the side, allowing them to avoid the bar while using less energy. For the run up in high jump, the centre of mass is mostly within the body, but when they jump and their back is in the air, their centre of mass travels under the bar, allowing them to get more height on their jump. These three motions change in high jump throughout its process. For instance, the run-up of both planes. For the run-up, both planes of movement and the axis remain the same until you get to the bar, and then they jump, and the second axis rotation is applied. Similarly, the centre of mass does not change during the run-up, but as you go to jump and get over the bar, the centre of mass moves under the bar, even though they are above it. Gymnastics. In gymnastics, all the levers are used similarly, like in high jump, which acts as a second class lever. When an athlete is running to do a jump, or to jump, or an aerial technique, the first class lever, which is in the neck, in this circumstance is used many times for gymnastics all day. Although it may be minor, it is still being used constantly. And finally, the third class lever, which is in the elbow joint, is used in almost every exercise in gymnastics that require the use of the arms. In gymnastics, all planes and axes have an effect due to the many different complex movements. The sagittal axis is used in the gymnastics when the gymnast is doing a cartwheel or another similar exercise. The frontal axis is the most commonly used when the gymnastics performs a front flip or back flip. And finally, the transverse axis is used during the start of the somersault and during it. In gymnastics, the centre of mass is almost always moving due to the gymnast never being in the same position. All of these motions in gymnastics change in ways constantly due to the many different complex and vastly different movements in gymnastics. Similar to gymnastics, all of the different levers are used in martial arts. For instance, the third class lever is used in the bicep or leg when performing a punch or a kick. The second class lever is used in the calf when the athlete changes stance. And finally, the third class lever is used so athletes can always be looking at the opponent. all three planes and axes are used and applied in martial arts. Movements in the sagittal plane about the frontal axis occurs when an athlete is performing a front kick or a punch. Movement in the frontal plane about the sagittal axis occurs when an athlete goes to dodge an attack from the opponent by leaning to the side. And finally, movement occurs in the transverse plane about the vertical axis when an athlete is pivoting on their back leg to perform a kick. For the most part, centre of mass remains relatively central on an athlete during martial arts because their aim is to stay upright and not to be knocked down. However, occasionally it can shift when an athlete is leaning to perform a kick or a dodge. Similar to gymnastics, due to many different movements in martial arts, all of the different motions are changing. However, for the most part, the centre of mass remains relatively centre in the body. Tennis. In tennis, all three of the levers are used. The first class lever is used to keep the neck supported so they can look up at their opponents and watch for where they might hit the ball. The second class lever is used so the athlete can push off to get to where the ball is and be able to counter the opponent's move. Finally, the third class lever is in the arm, and so the athlete can have a counter swing to the opponent's swing. All of the planes of movement and axes of rotation are used in the sport. The frontal axis is used when the athlete has to run either forwards or backwards to be able to reach the short or long shot from the opponent. Movement in the sagittal axis occurs when the player has to move side to side to reach the ball. And finally, movement occurs in the transverse axis when the player swings for the ball. They have to turn their body to be able to generate force to hit it back across the net. Compared to other sports, the centre of mass varies for tennis. This is because when an athlete is carrying a racket, it is slightly more, the centre of mass is slightly more to one side, meaning, but other than that, the centre of mass will be relatively similar to the other sports except from it is slightly shifted to the side with the racket. All three of these motions are changing in tennis due to the athlete having a racket, which means the centre of mass causes it to shift slightly more to the side with the racket on. Transverse axis is most commonly used due to the fact that the player is swinging so much for the ball, and similarly the first class lever is used the most due to the arm being swung the most. Yeah.